Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Matty B. And we're ready to get right into it here as the NBA Draft Lottery is underway as we record this. So even though you'll most likely be listening to it later down the road, this is happening live. So I'm just going to focus right now on the overall number one pick. And is anyone surprised that it is the Pelicans? Because they have been talking about losing Anthony Davis now for, a year or so? Maybe even longer than that. He's rumored to leave. And then just like LeBron left the Cavs, you're sitting here looking at a team with a miracle number one pick. So I don't want to say that it's rigged, but it's very suspicious that any time a small market team starts to lose their best player, they magically end up with the number one pick. And Matt, you're a fan of the 76ers, so you know how this process works. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, clearly, I'm not a fan of that process. I like the rewards that it's reaping now, but when you're stuck in that spot where you don't know what to do, it seems like even with the way that the NBA is now, they're trying to do everything that they can to not have teams tank. And I don't want to conspiracy theory it and say that the NBA is out to stop this. Like, they don't want the Sixers to win a championship, because to me, I think when you look at some of these super teams that they're putting together, I think that damages the NBA more than certain teams tanking. Because realistically, even if the Pelicans got rid of them, they weren't going to compete with Philly this year. They weren't going to compete with the Trailblazers. You look at the teams that are playing in the NBA playoffs right now that are left, the top four teams, they're not playing with them. It doesn't matter if they had the top pick or they didn't. They weren't going to compete. So I don't think that it really hurts them one way or the other.
I just think that it's surprising that it always seems like the team that is going to get hurt or have the most drop-off gets the number one pick. So I have the actual odds up. The Knicks had the best odds, followed by the Cavs once again. It seems like every time LeBron leaves, they're one of the top odds teams. But the Pelicans are all the way down to 7. They had the 7th best odds. But the Anthony Davis factor is weighing heavily on me. And if I was a gambling man, you would have had a good chance to make some money on that Pelicans pick getting the overall number one.
But I will say this: there was, and my mind's drawn a blank. I don't know what year it was when the Sixers were in the process and they were playing horribly. They were up for the top pick and didn't get it.
Matt, what do you mean by in the process? Are you insinuating that they are out of it? I thought they were still in the process. No,
we're out of it. The window is right now to win. Otherwise, they're going to be in a process of tanking again. They got to start winning right now. That's their window.
Well, I don't want to beat a dead horse on this draft, so we can get right into the 76ers if you want. What are your thoughts on their elimination this year?
It was horrible. It was horrible, horrible game planning. And normally I'm not one to scream at the TV, but I know a couple times my wife was looking at me like I was deranged.
Well, I got to say, did you hear the rumors that Embiid was contemplating not playing before that game?
I had heard that, and I don't know if that was injury related.
But you're in the biggest game of your career. It's time to take that next step. And if you're anywhere close to being healthy, I would think that you would want to play.
Well, here's my thinking with it. You're, 7 foot whatever, almost pushing 300 pounds, and you're standing outside. You're not Dirk Nowitzki. I can see them putting him around the free throw line area, like the high post area. I could see putting him there and being able to use him for screens. They had the stat, and I almost went through the roof. He was like 1 of 6 from 3-point. You're that big. Your big ass should not be at the 3-point line. It should be there to dribble. And when the thing that got them back in the game was when he started playing aggressively underneath. when he started attacking the basket and kicking the ball out, kind of like Shaq. When the Lakers were winning, when every place Shaq was at, when he was playing underneath, those teams were winning because they had to answer for him. And I think he has that. He has that presence, but some of the arguments to it was that Simmons plays underneath because he plays a better. It's a more difficult matchup for him. We'll get him out there. I trust Simmons shooting a mid-range shot better than I do Embiid, and I thought that was horrible game planning down the stretch. I mean, it just athleticism kept them in that game.
And I will say that I'm a little bit surprised because of the game plan, as you just described, that they extended the head coach for a year, because there were rumors that they were going to make a run at Jay Wright from Villanova. Not saying that he would have left, but he already has 2 national championships at Villanova. Why not kick the tires? I mean, the team is right there. You have the players to make a run. If you think it's coaching, you make the move now and try to get that in place for next year, but they're going to give him 1 more year, is what the early reports are after that elimination. But I will admit I was wrong on the Raptors. I said they only have Kawhi with actual experience and a chance to win the big game, and boy, did he ever. What did you think of that shot at the end?
I couldn't believe it. I thought when Butler went the length of the floor and hit the layup to tie it up, I thought they're winning this game. Like that, I thought that was a real gutsy play, and I was quite honest. I was surprised that they were in it. The game and the league changed so many different times through the game that at points you thought, oh, the Raptors are pulling away. Oh, the Sixers are going to put this one away, and it swung back and forth so dramatically that when they tied it up, I thought they're going to push this to overtime. And then when Leonard shot that from the corner, it just kept bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. It was like someone has to just tap it out or tap it in, and it dropped.
Yeah, I was surprised just that he even got it off, because he took too long with the dribble. He got it around mid-court, went down like he was trying to look for a cut lane, but Embiid did a great job, I believe it was Embiid anyway, of cutting him off and contesting the shot. So it was almost like that backyard shot that you just throw up as a kid when you're doing the countdown and hope that it goes in, knowing that there's not real pressure on you. And I honestly think that's what he did. He thought, oh crap, I have to just throw this up, at least the game is tied. I think that if, let's say at that same point, I think if the Sixers were up by 1 and they would have had to try to score, I think we would have saw a totally different shot. He wouldn't have tried that almost going away from the basket sort of fadeaway. Like, I think he would have tried to make at least one move to create contact, but just because I think it was a tie game, he almost just went with, all right, let's throw this up there and see what happens. Because it was up there for a long time. Like you said, it hits the rim. It's high enough that the initial bounce is almost straight up and off the rim again, and it rattles around in. So if you haven't seen the shot, definitely look for it, because it was an amazing shot. I believe they said it was the first ever Game 7 game-winning shot at the buzzer in NBA history in the playoffs. So that's crazy. They said Jordan was the only other one that had one in an elimination game, but it wasn't a Game 7. So impressive all the way around. I mean,
the other thing that really stood out with that game was how sloppy. Like, Simmons ended up filing out relatively. Like, I want to say it was for me. It was relatively early that I felt like he could have still contributed in the game, and fouled out, and then I think that hurt him. But that's also understanding. Like, they're playing physical, but don't play reckless. And I thought with the games that I've watched in Philly this past year, I said it last year, and I thought that they were getting over that hump of developing that winning mindset of not rushing. And it's like they were making mistakes that you just don't expect teams that are successful to make. And having those stupid fouls and getting yourself in foul trouble, even though they do have the bench depth, it doesn't help them. I think it changes the way that some of the game is called later if maybe he's out there on the floor instead of watching the game like we were.
Yeah, and I think that's where NBA has even talked about in the past about not eliminating players if they get too many fouls, like doing to explore different options instead of the foul out, where if I know it's been mentioned before, and I don't think they actually went too far with it, but if a player reaches a certain many, then possibly you do 3 free throws, or they have to sit kind of like a penalty box. And I honestly like the penalty box better, because then you're not keeping your star players out of the game. And then you also have the poor refereeing issues. I wasn't a fan of Golden State or Houston, but I watched that Game 7. At least I think it was Game 7. Maybe it was Game 6. I think it was Game 6 because it was in Houston. And there was a play that I thought potentially swung the game because Houston went in, and I forget the guy's name now. It's escaped my mind, but he had the ball at the three-point line, went to make a move, and someone from Golden State basically hooked his arm. I thought it was pretty blatant. And, of course, when he was going up for the shot, so he couldn't get his stabilizing arm up there, and it just kind of flailed away. And they just gave a turnover and gave the ball to Golden State. Well, of course, he yelled about it, and I didn't think it was anything egregious. I thought he just yelled a little bit, and the refs should have let it go, or I don't know how any of them missed it, because when a guy is going up to shoot, you have how many refs on the floor you don't see that his other arm is hooked by the defender, and they give him a tee, so then Golden State goes down, hits the free throws, and then they get the ball, and Houston was up pretty big at that point, maybe 5 or so, and it was in the third, I believe. So, I mean, nothing outrageous that Golden State wouldn't have been able to come back, but that pretty much evened the game up, that swing. And then you get down to it, then it's back and forth till the end until Golden State pulled away. But what if they never got that? What if instead Houston's shooting free throws to go up 7 or whatever it was going to be? And, of course, they don't show a replay of the technical. The NBA only focuses on the last 2 minutes. So if you watch the game, or if you didn't watch the game, rather, and you tried to find that play, you would never known that happened. So I couldn't even find a video. I tried to tweet it out after the game on Southbound Sports on our Twitter. You can follow us at S-Bound Sports, but I couldn't find it at all. So I was very disappointed. You would think that they would have plays like that under review. But what do you think going forward in games like that? Would you rather see guys not foul out, or are you fine with the current system?
I'm just going to stick to I like the idea of the penalty box, but I kind of also I want to just stay with the way that it is and just be smart enough that, once you start getting closer to foul trouble, I've talked before about the game within the game, and you can tell relatively early, regardless of what sport you're playing, how the officials are going to call the game, and whether you're talking football, whether you're talking basketball or baseball, what they're going to call, and so you have to kind of alter a little bit your style of play based off of what they're going to call. If they're going to, with football, if they're going to let you get away with holds, well, then hold away, because it's not going to affect you. If it gives you a little bit of an advantage, then go for it. But if they're going to be calling those, then it's shame on you for not adjusting.
And I'll say, I already had this in my notes, but I would lean for the penalty box, because we've talked about it the last couple of weeks, how bad the refs have been. But it's not just that. They're dealing with players that are flopping. I would like to see them go to a penalty box model earlier in the game, not after 6. Do it after 2 or 3. Give them a couple gimmies, and then after that, each foul's 2 minutes out. That way, you're giving players a chance to redeem themselves, or at least play cleaner. If it's something
now,
like...
Hold on.
Go ahead.
With what you're thinking, are you looking at treating the penalty box like the NHL does, where it would be a 5-on-4 advantage? Or are you just saying completely like they're out 2 minutes and they can substitute someone in and still continue playing 5-on-5?
That's a good question because I was not thinking of it like the NHL unless you're down a man. Like, let's say there's a brawl and you get because there's only, 10 guys? I think that if you're having your star players sit out, that's more realistic than doing a 5-on-4, at least in basketball. I mean, they could explore that down the line, but I want to say, let's say that James Harden comes down, kicks his leg out, they give him the initial 2-minute foul, a guy in the booth reviews it, calls down and says, no, he initiated that contact or whatever on purpose, and then they change it to a 5-minute major, so that your team has to play. It would still be 5-on-5, but you lose your best player for 5 minutes then. Because then that way, let's say a team sends out the hitman, you can still have your hitman come out. This might not be relevant in today's game, but back in the 90s, you would have a guy on your team that might just come out and give fouls late in the game. And I think if you start to do 5-on-4 and 5-on-3, then it really changes the game itself, and I don't think that would be for the best. I'm pretty much just trying to get some of the fouls down, because if your guys are going to be sitting out, your teams are going to foul less, and it's going to speed up the game. Going to something like 3 foul shots is more ridiculous, because then what? You're adding 15 minutes to the end of the game, 20 minutes to the end of the game, when dudes are usually fouling out. I'm just thinking of a deterrent that would speed the game up, not change the dynamics. I think you stay 5-on-5, but my whole goal is to speed it up by taking away these ticky-tack fouls, and then while the man's in the booth or wherever the box, then you don't have to slow play. The guy can review it upstairs, and he can call down and say if it was a flagrant one or whatever, and if it is, then he can't come out at 2 minutes. He has to stay in there, because it's going to be just like before. If he's out of the game, they're going to have to wait for a stoppage of play or take a timeout. So if it is one of your star players, you're going to have to do some coaching there. If there's no stop in action, you might want to call a timeout and then have to waste a timeout, and I think it would really hurt your team more and be more of a deterrent. Right now, there's no deterrent to fouling. You get a guy on a team that's a bad free throw shooter, just hack him. Hack a Shaq. That was a thing. You brought Shaq up earlier. Teams just started to foul him because he was awful at free throws. How is that fun for the fans? So, I mean, could you imagine if they were hacking Shaq with their best center and then he had to sit out for 2 minutes? Then Shaq would go on and dominate the next 2 minutes of the game. I think it would really change things. But, I mean, just a thought. I don't want to get into it anymore unless you have any thoughts to clean that up for me.
I did, but we can move on. I'm sure we got other stuff we need to hit.
Yeah, I was surprised that the Nuggets, looking at the other series here, that they choked. I guess I don't really want to say that they choked, but they had a chance to win on the road. It was close, and of course the West Coast game, I fell asleep, so I didn't catch the end of it. But then you go to Game 7 at home, and I really thought they were going to be able to get it done. But the Trailblazers came back, and to be honest, that was the only lower seed that won in the playoffs, I believe. Because I think, the Raptors were a 2 seed. So
yeah,
that
1 and 2.
That was the only lower seed that has won this entire playoffs. And that gets back to the draft lottery at the top. I mean, if you're not rebuilding, it's very tough for teams that make the playoffs that aren't in this lottery draft to take that next step unless you're very lucky, like Golden State was with their draft, and then later getting Kevin Durant to sign in free agency. That was almost like a fluke thing. Or if you get the LeBron special, where he teams up with a couple of friends and comes to your team. Realistically, that's the only chance your team has of making a jump, and you can look at Milwaukee for the same way. You're building around young players, hoping to take that next step. Will they get it done? They handled Boston pretty well. You're up against the Raptors. This was not the matchup I expected, but I think it's going to be I mean, obviously the most thrilling, I think, so far of the playoffs in the East, and that's coming off the heels of the 76ers-Raptors matchup. I think this series is going to be close, and I think it's going to be exciting to watch this next round. But do you have anything else on the NBA before we get into high tempo here?
Nope.
All right, what do you got for high tempo this week?
So doing a little bit of comparison, I saw some reports on Kyler Murray, and maybe some of those NFL GMs are actually listening to our show, because one of the things that they said when they interviewed Kyler Murray about how's the transition to the NFL, he said, well, it's going a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Well, part of the reason that they did that was because Cliff Kingsbury went and talked with Lincoln Riley to see what kind of terminology they were using, and then took that same terminology and weaved it into what their playbooks were going to be for the Cardinals. So he wasn't having to learn a whole new language and things for stuff that he was already comfortable with coming up from college. So I thought that was a really smart move, that instead of just saying, no, you're going to learn this extensive West Coast vocab like you saw, in the 90s and previous, but they're starting to tailor it to the guys that are coming in. They're using the smaller terminology, and I think it's brilliant. The other side to that was also just comparing the signing bonuses. When he signed with the A's, and I know a big part of that was he's going to have to pay that back. His signing bonus was only $4.6 million. His signing bonus with the Cardinals was $23.5. So I mean, that's a substantial jump, being the number one overall pick. And I would almost say that I would wonder what that bonus was going to be comparatively if he wasn't the number one overall pick, because I'm sure he would have went relatively high regardless.
Yeah, I will say that for baseball, I'm not sure how their things are slated, but I know that's pretty much guaranteed, and that's why a lot of people were trying to get them. I guess the A's were trying to get them Major League Baseball to give them a waiver to increase that. So I don't know if those picks are slotted in Major League Baseball, because you know how they are for football, where if you're taken, you can only make this much maximum to kind of curtail busts, so that you're not paying a bust for 20 years that never works out. So I think Major League Baseball, and I don't know if your number includes it, but I think they did give them the okay to give him a little bit more money to try to keep him with the A's. So I thought that was a good move, at least from memory. And onto your other point, I think that they almost have to change the terminology to get him comfortable, because I'm low on Kingsbury coming in, and I think that's his only chance. He has no chance if he tries to fit into what we complain about all the time, the Go-To Boys Network, where every NFL team has the same terminology and can do this and that. I think he really needs to shift it, because I think that's where Steve Spurrier had issues and Nick Saban had issues. When you come in, it takes a while for guys to learn your system. I think Saban really stayed with the college-type system that he had, and it takes a little bit longer for players to fit into that mold. And I think that's where a guy like Jim Harbaugh, coming from Stanford, he had played in the NFL for years. So he was able to just pick up and use the NFL system. Players didn't miss a beat, and they were able to explode. Same with Pete Carroll. Guys that have been in the NFL before, you're able to just switch that lingo. Where Kingsbury, he doesn't have that. So he studied with Mike Leach. I think this is where, and possibly, this is where you have a chance where Spurrier failed to just go ahead, implement your system, but you got to have time. Like Nick Saban didn't have time. He was only there for a year or two before he bolted. You got to get your system in, and you got to stand by it. I think what hurt Spurrier was the front office choices. They gave him too much leeway as a GM, bringing in his own guys instead of getting the best guys. And in the NFL, that's a different beast. You almost need someone to tell you to bring guys in. And that's what I'm really hoping that They gave him Murray. Okay. You got rid of Rosen. All right, I understand that. But now you need a pure NFL GM to say, I'm going to get you the best guys. I don't want to hear you say, oh, get this small receiver from so-and-so school because they run a similar system. It's not going to work. You need to get NFL-sized athletes and get them into your offense. So I'm excited that he's taken that step and trying to actually implement his offense. But, of course, we haven't seen it on the field yet. So I don't want to get too excited, but I'm at least a little bit happier that I'm not going to see the same run-down, half-spread offense that we've seen in the past by guys trying to implement it. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think what you're more than likely going to see, because Kingsbury was in the NFL for a little bit, so I think it is going to be, there are going to be certain concepts that are going to be present, but I think ultimately you're going to see more of the air raid being implemented, maybe not purely implemented, but you're going to see more of those concepts coming out, because I think you see them already. I mean, Pittsburgh runs a good deal of them with all of those shallow underneath routes and the spacing and the like the pick type plays where guys are crossing underneath. You're seeing that stuff being integrated. I just think that you're going to see it's something that Kingsbury is comfortable with. So obviously he's going to find ways to weave that in, especially with Murray being comfortable in that system.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, Kingsbury played, right? He wasn't a coach in the NFL.
Yeah, he quarterbacked with the Bengals.
Yeah, so that's what I meant. Like he hasn't actually coached to try to get his concepts across. When I meant Harbaugh, I didn't mean his playing years. He coached with the Raiders for a while before he went down to college to become a head coach. So he knew basically how to get quarterbacks to use the NFL system. He also played with it, so that's a bonus. Kingsbury has played with it, so he knows how to read the film, but most of his concepts have been taught to college players, so let's see how that translates. Because I don't want him to try to just hammer a square peg into a round hole where he's like, okay, this works, but I remember back to my NFL playing days, and we should really do it like this. Like, he really needs to just take his concepts and push them to that next level. But let's go ahead and get into, I have a huge topic this week. I put it in the back half because I knew we were going to hit the NBA with the NBA draft lottery and the playoffs. I didn't want to have NBA fatigue. Try to break it up with the high tempo, but gigantic news out of Michigan. John Beilein decided to take the Cavs job, Cleveland Cavaliers, yesterday. So, as a Michigan man, this came as a complete shock. And I will say only by the timing. It's only a shock because of when he left. Last year, for outsiders, John Beilein was coming off a national championship appearance where they fell short to Villanova, and the Detroit Pistons reached out to him. I thought that at that time that if he had won the national championship, he would have went to the Pistons. I think Beilein felt that he had a little bit of unfinished business. He had a core group of guys coming back and some talented freshmen coming in that he could make another run. So I felt like he was going to take one more shot at it, which he did. He came back. The team started out amazing, rose all the way, I think, up to number 2 in the polls, undefeated in the non-conference schedule. And then things started to fall apart. They still had a little bit of depth issues, especially at the center position, and made it to the Sweet 16, which isn't a knock because I know a lot of programs would love to make it to the Sweet 16, especially multiple years in a row. And at the end of the year, I think I talked about it earlier on the show, surprisingly, he had 3 players declare for the NBA draft, ones that I didn't think were ready. They all, fortunately, got an invite to the NBA Combine, and I want them to get drafted. But at the same time, I think that's what really wore on him. And he made some comments this week about the system just kind of being against him, for lack of better words. I know he used a more meteor choice of words to describe it, but I want to get your initial thoughts on it, Matt. What do you think of the move for Beilein to jump from college to the NBA?
I think at this point it's a pretty smart move. Depending on, is he going to be able to recruit LeBron to come back? Because I'm sure now that he's made the Lakers a disaster, he'll probably want to try to get out of his deal and come on back. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he handles that transition where you see a lot of coaches that come up through college and they kind of have a tighter rein on the players. Is he going to be able to push that onto guys with NBA contracts that in some instances may not care?
Yeah, and basically, if people that aren't familiar with John Beilein, I know a lot of people listened in the western half of Pennsylvania just based on our download numbers, and some in West Virginia. He coached at West Virginia for a while. He actually started at in Erie, Pennsylvania. I think it was Erie Community College. He's never been an assistant coach. If you watch any of the NCAA tournament games, they always talk about it. He got his first gig at, like I said, I believe Erie Community College, worked his way up, and he's been climbing the ladder, working through basically every division of college basketball. Community college, D3, D2, and then D1, finally gets a chance at West Virginia, has a few runs with West Virginia, and then took a Michigan team that was really down after the fallout of the Fab Five scandal and some head coaches that couldn't make that transition to take Michigan to the next level. So then Beilein comes in. It takes him a couple years to get going, and I understand his frustration. He brought in a great recruiting class that turned into the 2013 team that went to the national championship, fell to Louisville, and Louisville ultimately lost that championship due to their scandals. It's vacated, so no one claims that championship as of right now. But after that run, he really started to hit a streak of players leaving early for the NBA. And I don't want to say for better or for worse, but you have guys, he's had a ton of guys drafted, and a lot of them left early. More recently, right before the championship loss to Villanova, that previous season, he lost DJ Wilson to the NBA draft, got drafted by Milwaukee. He was their center, or at least one of their big men, and I think the following year he really could have used Wilson in that championship game to spell Wagner, because I think that's what started the string of lack of depth down low. You lose DJ Wilson early. The next year you make it to the national championship. I think if he came back, they might have won that game because Wilson had a 7-foot wingspan. I think he could have been put on DiVincenzo, who went off in that game. At that point, they had no one to go to. Wagner gets a couple fouls, and that game's over. But if you have a backup center that's athletic that you could put out there, that makes a world of a difference. And then the following year, coming into this season, Wagner goes pro early. It has to be hard on a coach that isn't getting one-and-done players. These aren't five-star guys. For the FBI trials, everyone was on Beilein for doing things the right way. And I've seen it picked up a lot across the sports landscape that it's really hitting a lot of the writers hard, and they've been going after the NCAA based on Beilein's comments about how he can't pay players, or, I mean, this is what the other media is saying right now. He's kind of hamstrung. He's trying to do things the right way, but you can't pay players. There's no reason for them to stay in college if they can go to the D League and get paid. So, I mean, if you were a coach, Matt, would you want your guys to get paid and start to get a better life, or would you want them to keep doing the fake college life that a lot of these basketball players live?
I think it's a really tough question, because you don't want to put yourself in a spot where a lot of players are having kids in high school, and you don't want to tell. I kind of like with some of the things that I'm hearing where they're able to kind of have some people provide some information of projected where they're going to be. You know, for the guys that are going to be a first-round player that are going to be able to have a chance to have a longer career, I think it's a no-brainer because, if you're playing, all 4 years and you get injured, that hurts your draft stock. Or if you leave early and you go to one of those developmental leagues and get injured, or you're playing in a system that doesn't match your skill set, that can hurt you to where you're not able to maximize your earning potential. And then you're no further ahead in terms of providing for your family. Now you're having to fall back. The worst case scenario is a lot of these guys declare early. It doesn't pan out professionally. They don't have a degree to fall back on. And now they're just kind of stuck in no man's land where they got to find some way to make ends meet because they're used to live in a certain lifestyle.
And I'll take it a step further and say, building off what you said there about not having the degree, does the university even owe it to you if you go there for 1 year and leave early without getting the first-round grade? I can see it if you're like Zion, clear number 1 to the Pelicans. I would be shocked if they picked anyone else because that pick was gifted to them to have someone to fill in for Anthony Davis, a big-name star, to keep their program relevant after losing the Hornets moniker. Then you have, what are you left with? You don't have any way to pay the players. So if they leave early because they are getting told by someone, hey, you can make whatever, you're going to make $1 million. Why don't you come to my law firm like the FBI things are saying? Why don't you come with my accountant company? Here, I'll give you $50,000 right now to prove that I'm loyal to you or that I know you're going to get it. So you're getting guys like this that are just slipping the money that aren't related to the university in any way. These are guys that the NBA, they're not really saying anything. Sure, the NCAA lets you come back if you use an approved agent, but, it's pretty clear by the FBI investigation that it's not only agents that are getting involved here. You have, accountants, shoe guys from Nike, Adidas, Under Armour that are all entangled into this, where they're said to be slipping money because, hey, you can get a shoe deal. And I'm not even talking about the major shoe deals because some of these guys, some of these basketball players are big in their local communities. You get a guy that's big in the New York playground scene, and you front him maybe not even millions of dollars. You're just saying, here, we're going to put a shoe out in your neighborhood and only advertise it in New York. That's going to cost us not that much money, so we're just going to give you $100,000 right here. What do you say? The players are almost always going to say yes. So it's very hard for them. Everyone can get swayed by just a little bit of money, I feel like, because when you're at college, if you don't see it, what are you going to do? And I'm actually going to circle back around that in a little bit because the NCAA is actually having meetings on that right now. But I would say, going back to the Beilein thing, I understand that he's frustrated, but he left at the worst time. If you were
with him,
go ahead.
With him leaving, who do you like as the front runner now to take over at Michigan?
Well, that's what I'm getting at. He left at the worst time, Matt, that I don't even know who you can get. Because most of the recruiting stuff right now is pretty much set. Beilein was in on a couple high guys in early May, and I think that's why he waited. Because, the Cavs were in the lottery. Why would he decide to go there right before the NBA lottery draft? If you're waiting, why don't you wait and see what pick you get? Why go right now? Cleveland doesn't have a strong roster. It doesn't make any sense. It seems like he waited until he didn't get a couple recruits. He has a couple coming in that are now on hold because they're like, okay, we're losing Beilein. I think one of the comments from one of the commits said, I got to wait and see who they hire now. I'm just not going to come play for anybody. And, of course, the NCAA should 100% let them go wherever they want to go. I saw that one got switched to possibly Kansas now and another one possibly Washington. Why hold them to Michigan? I feel like that's almost like a very poor thing that could only end badly for both sides. Players wanting to transfer down the line because you don't know who you're going to get. So right now, I really don't know what Michigan can do. from a coaching side, because you're almost looking at a lot of the college coaches positions are already filled. I believe Michigan had started to preliminarily reach out to coaches, and this is where it's also kind of like the silly timing, where coaches that aren't even possibly getting reached out to will throw something to the newspaper to see if they can get a raise. Like, I believe one of the guys, because I have a hard time believing that Michigan started to call some of the guys that were mentioned. At least I hope they weren't that desperate, where they're calling guys that barely have 500 records at smaller schools. But one of them, I think the guy had just taken the Alabama gig, and he said, like, no, I'm not interested, but he announced it publicly. Like, why would you do that unless you were trying to get a little bit of extra money at this point in the game? Or, like, you already take another job. No one was even expecting you to throw your name in the hat. But I want to get your thoughts, Matt, before I get into my list. What do you think going in this late? Like, what do you think their options realistically could be, and do you have any coaches in mind?
There is only one. I mean, I know, and I'm sure you're probably thinking, try to find some way to get him out of his deal and get Crean out of Georgia, since there's the family connections, and then I'm sure that's what you're thinking. But if you want to go with the man with the plan, go with LeVar Ball. Bring him in.
Oh my God! At first I didn't know what joke you're going to go with.
It's not going to hurt you, because he can bring Big Baller Brand in. You can upgrade the shoes, you can upgrade the uniforms, and he can bring the brand in. He's very, very arrogant, so he'll fit right in.
Well, Matt, I will say that first off, I honestly think, well, I hope that people listening know that those were both a joke. But I have seen Crean mentioned already, because if people that don't know, he is Jim Harbaugh's brother-in-law. So a lot of people were throwing that out there, that maybe Harbaugh could teach him the ways. But he was already at Indiana. And I don't even think he failed really at Indiana. He won a couple conference championships. I don't think he ever got... Did he ever make a Final Four? I know he didn't make a national championship game, at least that I remember. But I know he had the team ranked number one. Yeah, he had the team ranked number one for a while. And then they pushed him out, and look what happened to Indiana now. It's a dumpster fire. But I will say that right now, this late in the game, I think you're going to have a hard time getting any college coach. And if I'm the AD at Michigan, I know I have money at my disposal. You got to just start shooting the money cannon, because you're coming off a program that has been to 2 national championships recently. Those also count as Final Four. So you have 2 Final Fours, a couple Sweet 16s, 2 Big Ten tournament championships, 2 regular Big Ten season championships. So you're on a program that has been very, competitive. You could even argue that it's been the best in the Big Ten in recent years. And so what are you going to do? If I were any coach right now, the first 2 things that you got to call, you want to get coaches with college experience. And I'll say these are going to be no's, but you have to at least reach out to Brad Stevens, who took Butler to the national championship, and he's at Boston. He's been having high player turnover in Boston. He's thrown into yet another cycle with Anthony Davis. I think you call him and ask, are you tired of the NBA? Come back. Obviously, I think he says no. The one that might be realistic from the NBA is Billy Donovan. And I didn't know if you were going to give me a serious candidate, Matt, but I thought this might be the name you're throwing out there, because he won 2 national championships at Florida. He tanks his last year at Florida because he publicly flirts with the NBA, and it's been pretty public. He's coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder right now, that they want him out. He's in the last year of his contract. It's going to be a very stressful year. I've heard from multiple writers all year from Oklahoma City that he does not get along with Westbrook. Why not kick the tires on him? There was a public recruitment for him at Indiana when they had their job opening. I think he was one of their number 1 targets. And a lot of Indiana guys have been putting out like troll messages saying that he was on campus buying houses today, just trying to mess with Michigan because the Indiana fans are still bitter. But that would be, I would think that those two would be outrageous. And Matt, I'm going to throw a name out there that you're probably going to laugh at. But this would be, personally, my number 3, Rick Pitino. What do you think of that?
I would put a clause in there, make sure he's not going to jail.
I think he's already been cleared. The FBI had no connection to him. UCLA, he came out and practically begged for the UCLA job. Could you imagine if he had taken the UCLA job? I don't count vacated titles, as I've said countless times on the show. So he has 2 national titles at 2 different schools, Kentucky and Louisville. And he has other resume. I mean, he's coaching the NBA. He's now coaching in Greece, I believe, for their program. He's done some Olympic stuff. He's a great basketball coach. Sure, he had some weird recruiting things go down at Louisville, but the FBI investigated that. And if they found no connection to Rick Pitino, then I would say that the NCAA has to clear him. And why not? How can you do worse than Rick Pitino? Worst case scenario, he takes Michigan. Michigan does have some talent returning. They have John Teskey, a great center, coming back, especially in the college game. And they have Xavier Simpson, who's one of the best point guards, at least in the Big Ten. And he's coming back strong. So he has players to work with. Give him a shot. I don't even care about... a lot of people are probably going to come out and say, oh, why would you want him? You're not a true Michigan man because we need a guy with integrity. Why? Integrity, Beilein got how many national championships? 0. How was that integrity when he left late for the Cavs? I mean, where's the integrity now on that? You left the team, and basically you left them to burn because you had 3 guys declare for the NBA. You didn't land any transfers. I think you whiffed on all 3 of them. You didn't get any of the other big recruits to backfill. So you run to the Cavs? That's the cynical view of it. So you can't tell me that Pitino would be any worse. I think he'd be grateful to have the job, and I think he'd be busting his ass. But go ahead. What were you going to say there?
I don't think he would be a bad hire. But I wonder who is on staff that already has a hand in recruiting, that already knows the program, that you could comfortably hand the keys over to, because I would assume that there's someone on his staff right now that would be willing to step into that head coaching role. I think instead of going the opposite direction, instead of throwing money at someone and hoping that they can bring that talent in, just keep someone that can continue that continuity.
Well, that's where I was going. My home run hires that I mentioned there, the top 3, those were all guys that have had success at the college level and the NBA. Brad Stevens is rated one of the greatest coaches, so if you're going to throw some money at him, I don't know what he makes with the Celtics, but if Michigan can throw all that money at Harbaugh and get donors to pony up for trips to South Africa and all kind of other foreign countries, you can pony up for a basketball coach if you really wanted to. I feel like they're not going to do that, and so that's when you look internally, and you have Washington, who's been an assistant. He has a little bit more seniority, but you're going to like this. The guy that I think everyone is leaning towards if it does go internal, and I'm probably going to butcher his last name because I've only seen it written, is Yaklich, who was brought in. He was a high school basketball coach for years and a history teacher, gets brought in as an assistant, because Beilein admittedly says that he is awful at teaching defense. So he brings him in as a defensive coach. And I honestly think without him on the staff, they don't go back to the national championship last year. That run against Villanova, his defense built that team up. And then also a name that's on the odds, because they have odds on this in Vegas, you can bet on it, would be Chris Beard, Texas Tech's coach, who has come out and said that he has built his defensive-minded team based off of Michigan, off that same philosophy. So would you just try to get him instead? I mean, I know Michigan can outpay Texas Tech, He runs a similar system. He's admitted in the tournament this year that he's based it off Michigan. He's come and worked out with Beilein and that, so he knows the system. I think he could fit right in and have a little bit easier time recruiting. Do they go that route? Why not kick the tires on some other national championship winning coaches? I mentioned Jay Wright for the 76ers. If they were looking at him, maybe he's looking to get out of Villanova. Why not give it a shot? Michigan and Villanova are very similar historic programs. Try him. Tony Bennett at Virginia. His dad coached at Wisconsin. I believe all his family's up there in Big Ten country. Shoot the money cannon at him. You know Virginia's not going to pay for a top coach. And then after that, that's where you just circle back, Matt. If you can't get any of the top coaches, I don't want to see what UCLA did, where they were trying to hire another Pitt guy. The old coach that's now at TCU, Jamie Dixon, that was their guy. And if you remember, when it came to contract negotiations, it was very public that they were going to hire him. And then it came out that he had an $8 million buyout, and they said, you know what, we're not going to afford that. And they made one of the most underwhelming hires for a blue blood program of all time, I think. So, sure, I throw out some names and joke, and this is going to be the end of my Beilein segment. But, man, just not because it's Michigan. I think this has implications for all of college basketball. If one of the top coaches just gives up in the middle of the offseason because, I mean, he has to feel that he lost a couple of those transfers and recruits due to the cheating that's been going on and that the FBI is in the middle of investigating, so much so that he just gave up. It's a bad look for college basketball, and I think that's where you get into the next one I just want to talk on a little bit. So as soon as this happens, Matt, the NCAA starts exploring likeness options for players, which means that, and this is only going to be a quick-hitting segment before we get into the NHL to finish a show, they're looking at paying players, or at least allowing them to make money off likeness. And I honestly think the reason they're going to look at this route first is the Beilein thing is a huge black eye. It's been trending for the past 2 days. They're getting a lot of negative articles on a coach that for the past, 2013 was the last national championship run. So for the last 6 years, every March, they do specials on how Beilein's doing things the right way, how he's a great coach with integrity, and then he just gives up because he said it's a rigged game, basically. So the NCAA is in damage control right now, and so they're looking into paying players, and I think they're doing this because of Title IX. If you start to pay male players, football players, or basketball players, you're going to have to pay female athletes the same amount. By doing the likeness option, you do not have to do that because it's not going to be a flat rate. And I think that this is going to get pushed through, and then we'll see what the backlash is of this. But I want to get your thoughts before we end it. Do you think, compared to the stipend that's been thrown around of like $5,000 a year for all athletes on the school, this one makes the most sense, but I have a feeling that it's going to go through or it's going to be rejected because of the backlash. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a possibility that it could end up, because to me that's a win-win. That's as close to a win-win as you can get. If you want to, like, there was the video of the kicker who ended up giving up his college scholarship so that he could continue making his YouTube videos. I think when you look at those kinds of instances, I think if they can continue to put out videos and get the social media attention and earn money that way, then I think go for it. It shouldn't have.
And the rules are so backwards now that I don't know if the player actually signed at Michigan, but I do know that there was a basketball recruit from a year or two ago that was buying tennis shoes, sneakers. God, I mispronounced that, but he takes sneakers, does like designs on them or resells them or something, and then resells them back at a markup. But because he started this little side business before he was recruited, the NCAA lets him keep doing it. And then, like you said, Matt, then there's a guy that was doing YouTube videos the NCAA looks at this YouTube channel and says, you're doing a lot of kick tricks on your YouTube channel. That's very similar to punting in a football game. And the guy was from UCF. We talked about him. I mean, it was a feature for one of our shows. We went into it pretty in-depth. But they were like, no, that's too close to football. So you're not going to be able to keep doing that. But to me, I don't see the difference. If you're making shoes as a high school athlete that's like doing designs, unless you're like a big-name artist, which most likely you're not, you're only making even more money on shoes because people know who you are and are able to find your store and then have some trust for you. So just let them get paid. And I think this is where you're really going to see the gaps. And it will be interesting to see if any women's basketball players get paid. Because you would imagine that there's going to be some number one picks from like the WNBA that they might start throwing some endorsements to these players. And we'll be able to see the real gap. But I think there's going to be huge backlash. But I have a feeling that I don't want to spend... We already ate up a lot of the time on basketball on the show. Normally we don't even talk about basketball. But I don't want to eat up any more time as we're getting late here. Let's get into the NHL playoffs. Of course, I put the game down on Hyde. But the Canes right now, Hurricanes make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. Huge down here, playing against the Bruins. And they get slaughtered in the first two games. And their longest tenured player, Williams, put out a great quote this week. He said, Matt, that it was like eating a poop sandwich. Sometimes you have to choke down those high-scoring games. And hopefully they can return and get a win in Carolina. But did you watch any hockey?
Well, the funny thing is, poop sandwich is exactly how I would describe how Carolina's playing, because if they keep this up for two more games, they're going to be watching the rest of the playoffs like me and you are. Because they're down 2-1 right now, and they need to get their act together because they're not getting it done. When you're already down 2-0 in the series, you better find some answers in a hurry.
Oh, I think that if they don't win this game, it's over. I would think it's going to be a sweep. And I was worried going in that they swept last round and the Bruins were going to be fresher. But at this point, I just think that there's a talent gap. I think that they weren't one of the best two teams in the Eastern Conference, or even one of the top four, maybe not even the top 8 teams in the whole league, but just based on matchups and playing hot, they were able to get this far. Now, will they be able to build on it next year? I don't know. If you look at it on the opposite side, the Penguins just flamed right out. Who's in a better position for next year? That's yet to be seen. Penguins have the experience. They're not going to lose Crosby. So are the Canes going to be able to build on this? I think it's really looking like it's going to be the Bruins over the Sharks for the Cup right now. Sharks also put on a scoring barrage out there, but I did want to bring up this kind of late too, so I didn't know if I should talk about it on the show or not, but we're already at the end. The Avs and Sharks series, did you see the goal that they took away from the Avs, Matt? I know it's going back. So, and this is where you just have to yell at the player, because Avs did a line change. The player leaving the ice was inside their offensive zone, standing there. Of course, the puck's in the middle of the ice. He didn't even attempt to get over onto the bench, Matt. The puck gets stolen by an Avs player. He takes it into the zone, comes up, they score. Upon replay, I think the Sharks coach might have even urged them, and they said, hey, that's offsides. He never left. And so they review it, confirm that he was offsides, and disallow the goal, which I will say, huge call. Great use of it, because I think that that's bullshit, because I see players do it all the time where they do the line change. First thing, it should be too many men on the ice, because I think the rule is, I read it in the rule book, that you have to have your skates off the ice. It should never have been an offsides that disallowed it. I think it should have been too many men on the ice, because he didn't even attempt. But how lazy are you in, Matt, a Game 7? A Game 7, you're thinking, holy shit, I better not mess this up. At least that's what I would be thinking. Not, oh, I'm going to casually go over here and maybe get off the ice. Like, could you imagine if you were that guy? And I don't even remember who it was, but I do have the clip saved in my browser. I'm going to tweet it out after the show, where it's very clear on the replay. I guess I didn't watch it live. I missed it because the West Coast games are just so hard here on the East Coast.
Yes.
That I go back and I watch it. The original TV angles did not show that angle, but they did have one that the refs were able to confirm that he's standing there. And he's not even attempting to move. And it's almost like, and I was going to throw one out of left field here, that's what it feels like to be a Pirates fan. Like, it's free agent season. Nah, we're just going to stand. We're going to stand here, Matt. We're just going to casually stand here while our players are trying their best to win the game, but nothing's just going to stand there on the ice, hamstringing the team.
Like playing blackjack. You got 5. Stay. Stay.
I mean, you're right there, and I don't even know how they don't cut that guy this year. I don't even know if he was a team captain. If he's a team captain, you have to cut him and say, look, what are you doing? It's almost like when the 49ers with Harbaugh, the one year they were playing, it was the year the Giants ended up beating the Patriots in the Super Bowl, but they had a punt returner that fumbled 2 punts while the 49ers had the lead, and one of them led to the Giants either tying the game or the go-ahead game. And after the game, they just cut him. They were like, no, you can't cost us the game and not get cut. Like, how can we bring you back to the locker room? Because you're just going to remind the players of that. So if I were the Avs, cut that guy. I don't remember who it is. But, I mean, hockey, it's getting into the good times now. I was hoping the Canes would be able to make a series of it, possibly stretch it to 7. That was all I wanted them to do against the Caps. But, of course, I thought that the Penguins would be playing that second round. But here we are. Do you have anything else you want to talk about with the NBA or the NHL, Matt?
Nope.
All right, let's get into the final bell. You got anything for our final bell this week?
Got a pair. Congrats to the Lady Knowles track team on their conference champion, and for the 6th time in a row, the Knowles took the ACC championship in softball. So onward to the playoffs.
Speaking of the ACC championships, did Pitt win anything, Matt?
Probably not.
Why are you not pandering to our audience?
Because I was excited to see that Michigan is going to get knocked out of the softball playoffs early. Because they're matched up with St. Francis Loretto, baby.
Oh, I was going to bring that up.
The Flash.
Just like you said, Michigan wins yet another Big Ten championship, just like the Knowles. When you're cream of the conference, the only northern team to win a national championship, of course you're going to win the conference almost every year. Until our coach retires, surprisingly just random, in the middle of like the off season, and you can't find a new coach. Like, not better about basketball or anything. But they're teamed up against Loretto, St. Francis, the Red Flash. Which, come on, I will say this, that there's already how many schools named St. Francis? Change the name. You need to start drawing straws with the other schools named St. Francis and start to give yourself an identity. Because if you have to put St. Francis, New York, or St. Francis, PA beside your name, you need to come up with a new strategy there. Unless you are the same school, but I don't think that they are. So, that's my last little tidbit. But Michigan did get a bad draw because they got to play UCLA, the number 2 team overall, in the second round. And surprisingly, the Big Ten actually got 2. Northwestern is actually hosting a regional. Number 16, and of course, even worse than Michigan, they got to play number 1 Oklahoma if they win their home series. So, not a good draw for them. Very worried, but at least a good see another Big Ten team, especially one like Northwestern that usually focuses on academics, making some strides in some women's sports. But I did have one more thing, not really sports related, but I went to the Epicenter Festival, which is a gigantic gigantic music festival, rather, at a sporting venue, the old Rockingham Speedway. a NASCAR speedway that I guess they did drag races at and stuff, and someone had said they might have done a full NASCAR race there. And I will say this, how? How is that even possible? Because this track, Matt, is in the middle of absolutely nowhere. The first day of the show, traffic was so bad because it was a 2-day lane. It took people hours to get to the show before they gave up. So I will say for logistics reasons, a lot of people that are planning, like XFL, and even like when they did the AAF, anyone looking at like the small venues, you have to think there has to be some type of logistics. Why would you try to bring 100,000 people into the middle of nowhere and then realize, oh, you know what? There's only one road into this place. We got to make it one way. And then everyone had to drive in a gigantic circle the entire way around the racetrack to get out, so it added like an extra 30 minutes to get out. So that was my fun weekend because I like when I go to tailgate. A lot of people like Penn State's because it's kind of open. You can just find a field and look for the gigantic reflection of steel in the field, and you'll be able to find your place. But not so much for big events in the middle of nowhere. So people that complain about Pitt's campus or Pitt's football stadium not being on campus, you would suffer the same problem. Just you would have more roads, less parking. So you can at least be grateful for that. I know I'll probably get some hate mail. But that's my last thought for the day. You have anything else for us, Matt?
Nope. Just check out the website, check out the store, get some stuff, support the show.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this still, because some people might have tuned out early, if you download the show, it comes out on iTunes every Wednesday. I've been noticing a big spike on like Monday or Tuesday when iPhones on Apple check. I think you can change the setting, but I think by default it checks at the beginning of the week for new episodes. If you're one of the ones that's downloading it late, you're probably going to be getting the information we talk about a little bit late. So you can open up the app and make sure you refresh that on like Wednesday. Sometimes it takes a bit to get up, but by the afternoon Wednesday or even Thursday morning, you can try to download the show to make sure you're getting it as soon as possible. You can always go to our Facebook, Southbound Sports, and follow it live Tuesday nights. That's the quickest way to get it. And I've been premiering it on YouTube on Wednesday at 9, so you can watch it live again if you would like on YouTube, again at Southbound Sports. But like Matt said, you can get all of that at southboundsports.com, along with some of our merch to help support the show. So definitely check that out. I'm keeping improving it, starting to put some transcripts up. So if you know some people that would rather read our thoughts, those are hopefully going to be up. But we have a big backlog of those. So my goal is by the beginning of football season to have them all up. We'll see how that goes. I'll try my hardest. But once again, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.